Could a man haunted by the ghost of a past failure find redemption in the eyes of a beast condemned by its own fury in the vast, unforgiving landscape of the Texas? Big Bend, a lone figure, stood silhouetted against a crimson sunset, his shadow stretching long and thin across the cracked earth. Texas Ranger Jake Callahan, a man whose face was a roadmap of stories he never told, stared out at the Chisos Mountains, the rugged peaks mirroring the sharp edges of his own soul. At 58, he moved with the deliberate slowness of a man carrying more than just the weight of his years. A ghost followed him, a memory of a lost child on the Rio Grande, a rescue he had arrived moments too late for, an event that had carved a hollow space in his chest that no amount of time or tequila could fill. He had sought refuge in the solitude of this remote outpost, finding a strange comfort in the silence of a land that asked for nothing but endurance. His patrol area was a sprawling kingdom of dust and stone, home to creatures as tough and unforgiving as the terrain itself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. And none were more legendary than the great lone bison bull the locals called Chief was a magnificent anachronism, a relic from a bygone era, his massive head crowned with horns that curved like twin scythes, his shaggy coat the color of rich earth, and his shoulders a mountain of pure muscle. He had been cast out from the state park herd years ago. Too aggressive, too dominant, too untamable to coexist, ranchers told tales of him. Tearing through fences with casual indifference, hunters spoke of his cunning and the unnerving intelligence in his dark, obsidian eyes. He was a force of nature, a symbol of the untamable wild that Jake both respected and understood. For Jake saw a kindred spirit in the outcast bull, a shared isolation, a mutual refusal to be broken by the world. But this harsh paradise was not without its serpents. Silas Vance, a man who collected rare and dangerous things with the same cold passion he applied to his corporate takeovers, had recently acquired a sprawling ranch bordering the national park. Vance, known in certain circles as the Vulture for his predatory business dealings, had a private menagerie of exotic and often illegal animals. He saw the land not as a sanctuary, but as a treasure chest, and he coveted Chief as the ultimate prize, the crown jewel for his collection. Jake knew men like Vance. They saw the world in terms of ownership and control, concepts that were utterly foreign to the spirit of the Big Bend. The first call came on a Tuesday morning, the air already shimmering with heat. The voice on the other end belonged to a frantic tourist who'd seen something slithering across the road near Vance's property, something impossibly large, something that didn't belong in Texas. A 15-foot reticulated python. Jake felt a familiar knot tighten in his stomach. One of Vance's pets was loose. As Jake drove his dusty patrol truck down the winding desert roads, he felt a sense of foreboding. The python was a problem, but it was the principle that gnawed at him. Vance's arrogance, his casual disregard for the natural order of things, was a poison seeping into the land. Jake found the tracks easily, a wide, unnatural swath carved through the creosote bushes leading away from Vance's ranch and towards the open range. The tracks of the python were horrifying in their size and power, but it was the other tracks that made Jake's blood run cold, the massive cloven hoofprints of a single bison chief. The two paths converged near a rocky outcrop, and the signs of a violent struggle were etched into the earth. Uprooted sodal plants, scattered stones, and the deep gouges of a massive body thrashing in agony. Jake grabbed his rifle and followed the trail on foot, his heart pounding a steady drum against his ribs. The silence of the desert was absolute, broken only by the buzz of unseen insects and the crunch of his boots on the gravel. What he saw when he saw rounded the final rock formation would be burned into his memory forever. Chief, the indomitable spirit of the Big Bend, the 2,000-pound mountain of muscle and fury, was on the ground, his massive frame enveloped in the deadly embrace of the python. The snake's mottled brown and yellow scales glistened in the sun, its body a thick cable of muscle tightening with inexorable force. Chief's breaths were ragged, tortured, gasps, his powerful legs kicking feebly against the unyielding coils. The great bull's eyes were wide with a terror and agony that transcended species, a silent plea that struck Jake harder than any physical blow in that moment. Chief wasn't a dangerous beast, he was a victim, a life being brutally extinguished by an invasive evil, and Jake saw not a bison, but the ghost of a child in the swirling waters of the Rio Grande. Another life slipping away while he stood helpless, but he wasn't helpless now. He was a Texas Ranger, and this was his watch. What do you do when you're faced with a monster to save a beast that everyone fears, but you alone understand? The instinct for self-preservation screamed at Jake to wait for backup. A python of that size was a 2 or 3 man job. Trying to tackle it alone was a suicide mission. His service revolver would be useless against the snake's thick hide, and a rifle shot risked hitting the bison. But as he watched, Chief let out a low, shuddering moan, a sound of surrender, a death rattle that echoed in the hollow space in Jake's chest. He knew there was no time. The memory of his failure on the river surged through him, a cold tide of regret and impotence. Not again. He whispered the words, a prayer and a promise. Not on my watch. Jake dropped his rifle. It would be too slow, too clumsy. This required something more primal. He drew the large Bowie knife from the sheath on his belt, its blade honed to a razor's edge. He had carried it for 30 years, and it had never failed him. He began to circle the writhing mass of muscle and scales, looking for an opening, for a chance to sever the head without getting caught in the deadly coils. The python, sensing his presence, loosened one coil slightly, its head rising from the bison's side, its forked tongue tasting the air, its black eyes cold and devoid of anything but predatory instinct. The snake was magnificent and terrifying, a perfect killing machine, but Jake didn't see a monster. He saw a problem that needed solving. He moved with a speed that belied his age, feinting to the left, then darting to the right as the python struck with blinding speed, its fangs missing his leg by inches. The maneuver gave him the opening he needed. As the snake recoiled, Jake lunged forward, his entire body a coiled spring of desperate energy. He brought the Bowie knife down in a powerful arc, aiming for the point just behind the serpent's massive head. The blade sank deep, and Jake twisted with all his strength, severing the spinal column with a sickening crunch. The python's body went into a series of violent death throes, the coils tightening spasmodically around the bison with one last surge of constricting power. Then just as quickly the pressure released, and the massive snake went limp, its lifeblood staining the Texas dust. A deep, visceral red. Jake stood panting, his shirt soaked with sweat, his hands trembling from the adrenaline, his gaze fixed on the bison. Chief lay motionless for a long moment, his great chest still, his eyes closed. Jake feared he was too late, that the rescue had been in vain. He approached cautiously, knife still in hand, expecting a violent reaction if the bull was still alive. But when he reached the bison's side, he saw the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of its ribs. He was alive. Jake knelt down, his own exhaustion forgotten, and placed a hand on the bull's shaggy hide. Easy now, big fella, he said, his voice soft and raspy. You're safe. It's over if you believe that every life is worth fighting for, even the ones the world has written off. Please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Stories like this remind us that true courage isn't about the absence of fear, it's about acting in spite of it. Your support helps us share these incredible tales of compassion and redemption, proving that one person can make a world of difference. Chief's eye opened slowly. It wasn't the wild, panicked eye of a cornered beast. It was calm, lucid, and focused directly on Jake. In that moment, something passed between the man and the animal, an understanding that went beyond words, a shared experience of a brush with death. The bison did not scramble to his feet. He did not charge. He simply lay there, looking at the man who had saved him, as if seeing him for the first time. The sound of an approaching vehicle shattered the silence. Jake looked up to see a customized Jeep roaring across the plain, leaving a plume of dust in its wake. It stopped a short distance away, and Silas Vance emerged dressed in expensive safari gear, his face a mask of cold fury behind him. Two ranch hands armed with tranquilizer guns stepped out of the vehicle. My python Vance spat, his eyes flicking from the dead. "Snake to Jake, what the hell did you do?" "I did my job," Jake replied, his voice low and steady, his hand never leaving the bison's side. "Your pet was killing one of this land's true kings." Vance's eyes narrowed, his gaze shifting to the weakened bison. He took in the bull's exhausted state, the opportunity presenting itself with perfect clarity. A predatory smile touched his lips. "Well, it seems you've done me a favor, Ranger. He was always too much trouble to catch when he was at full strength. Now he looks much more manageable." He nodded to his men. "Get the nets ready." Jake rose slowly, positioning himself between Vance's men and the still recovering bison. He didn't draw his weapon, he just stood there, a lone figure against the vastness of the desert, a silent guardian. "He's not going anywhere." Vance laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "You can't be serious, Ranger. That's a wild animal, a menace, and I have a permit to capture problem animals on my property, which, as you can see, this one was trespassing near. He's not a problem animal." Jake said, his voice unwavering. "He's a survivor, and you're not laying a hand on him." The two men stared at each other, the Texas Ranger and the corporate vulture, a clash of two opposing worlds, one built on respect and duty, the other on acquisition and greed. The sun beat down on the tableau. The dead python, the recovering bison, the two armed ranch hands, and the lone lawman standing his ground. It was in that tense moment that Chief began to stir with a series of grunts and groans. The massive bull struggled to get his legs under him. He swayed unsteadily for a moment, his immense strength drained by the ordeal. Vance's men raised their tranquilizer guns, ready to fire. But then the bison did something that stunned everyone. He took a deliberate step forward and stood directly behind Jake Callahan, his massive head just over the ranger's shoulder, his presence a silent declaration of allegiance. It was a choice, a conscious alignment with the man who had shown him not dominance but deliverance for the first time in his life. Silas Vance was speechless. The sight before him defied all logic, a wild, untamable beast standing shoulder to shoulder with a human, a silent partnership forged in the crucible of a life-or-death struggle. Jake never took his eyes off Vance, but he could feel the warmth of the bison's breath on his neck, the solid, reassuring presence of 2,000 pounds of loyalty. At his back he had saved the bull, and now in a way the bull was saving him. The dynamic in the small, dusty clearing had shifted dramatically. What had been a simple matter of a lawman and a poacher was now something more profound, a testament to an unspoken pact between two survivors. Silas Vance's men looked uncertainly at their boss, their tranquilizer guns suddenly feeling useless. The narrative had changed. This was no longer a simple capture mission. It had become something they didn't have a protocol for. Vance, for his part, was a man who understood power, and what he was seeing was a form of power he couldn't comprehend or control. It wasn't the power of force or money, it was the power of connection, something he had long since dismissed as a sentimental weakness. "Now get off this land, Vance." Jake's voice was quiet, but it carried the unyielding authority of the law. "You're in a state-patrolled area. You're responsible for the death of this protected animal through criminal negligence, and you are attempting to illegally capture wildlife. I can arrest you on half a dozen charges right now." Vance's face contorted with rage. He was accustomed to a world where his will was absolute, where problems could be bought or bullied into submission. But Jake Callahan wasn't a problem. He was a fact as immovable as the mountains behind him, and the bison standing with him was a fact that defied every rule Vance lived by. "You haven't heard the last of this, Ranger," Vance snarled as he climbed back into his Jeep. "This land belongs to the highest bidder." Jake watched them drive away, the dust settling back onto the quiet desert floor. He turned to Chief, his hand resting on the bull's powerful neck. The bison nuzzled his hand gently, a gesture of trust so profound it made the old ranger's heart ache. "Thanks for the backup, partner." Jake murmured, a small smile touching his lips. For the first time in what felt like years, he spent the next hour with the bull, waiting for him to regain his full strength. He checked the bison over for injuries, finding only superficial cuts and rope-like bruising from the python's coils as the sun began to dip lower, casting long purple shadows across the landscape. Another vehicle approached this one, a familiar state parks and wildlife truck inside, was Dr. Aris Thorne, the regional veterinarian, and a young by-the-book ranger named Miller who had been assigned to Jake's station. Thorne, a woman whose calm demeanor belied a fierce passion for her work, stepped out of the truck, her eyes widening at the scene. The dead python, the massive bison standing peacefully beside. Jake Dispatch said you had a situation with an escaped exotic. Jake, I didn't realize. It was a full-blown biblical epic. She said, her voice a mixture of awe and concern. Is he all right? Jake nodded. Chief here is tougher than a $2 steak. He'll be fine. Just needed a little help with a pest problem. Ranger Miller stared at the bison, his hand hovering near his sidearm. Sir, protocol dictates we should tranquilize the animal for transport and examination. It's a class 1 danger animal. That isn't necessary, Miller. Jake said calmly. He's with me. Dr. Thorne approached slowly, her movements careful and deliberate. She had dealt with Chief before, always from the safety of a reinforced vehicle. She watched as Jake spoke to the bull in low tones, stroking his neck. As she got closer, to her amazement, the bison remained perfectly calm, his dark eyes watching her with what seemed like curious intelligence, not aggression. I don't believe it, Thorne whispered. I've never been able to get within 100 yards of him without him trying to turn my truck into a tin. Ken, it seems he's made a friend, Jake said. Simply, sometimes all it takes is showing up when you're needed most. Dr. Thorne conducted her examination with Jake by her side, talking to the bull. The entire time the results were astonishing beyond. The bruising Chief was unharmed, his vitals were strong, and his demeanor was that of a domesticated animal rather than a wild beast. The story of the ranger and the bison spread like a brushfire through the small communities of West Texas. It became a local legend, told and retold in diners and bars, a modern-day fable of courage and an unlikely friendship. Silas Vance was eventually charged with a litany of offenses related to his illegal animal collection, facing hefty fines and the potential loss of his ranch. His power had been checked not by a greater force, but by the quiet integrity of a single ranger and the loyalty of a wild animal. Jake knew that Chief could not remain on the open range, where he might again fall prey to men like Vance, so he made a decision that would change the course of his own life. He used a small inheritance he had long forgotten about to purchase a small tract of land adjoining his own property, a piece of pristine desert that he began to fence off. Not to keep animals in, but to keep danger out. It would be a sanctuary, a place where wounded or outcast animals could find peace. He called it the Last Stand Sanctuary, a nod to both the land's history and his own personal. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Journey Ranger Miller and Dr. Thorne helped him in their off hours, and local ranchers, surprised by the story and Jake's quiet dedication, donated old fencing and supplies. The community that had once feared Chief began to see him as a symbol of their own rugged resilience. Chief was the sanctuary's first and most important resident. He had followed Jake willingly to the new property, settling into his new home as if he had always belonged there. His presence was a calming force, a silent testament to the power of second chances. As the months turned into a year, the Last Stand Sanctuary grew. Jake took in an injured coyote, a golden eagle with a broken wing, and a family of javelinas. Displaced by a fire, each animal brought a new sense of purpose to his life, filling the hollow space in his chest with something warm and real. The ghost of the Rio Grande still visited him in his dreams, but now the memory was different. It was no longer a symbol of his failure, but a reminder of his purpose to stand for those who could not stand for themselves. He would often sit on his porch in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the sky with impossible colors. Chief would wander over and stand beside him, their two silhouettes blending into the gathering dusk. Two old survivors who had found in each other not just a friend, but a reason to keep fighting, a reason to believe in redemption. Jake's quiet work did not go unnoticed. A journalist from Austin got wind of the story and traveled to the Big Bend to interview the aging ranger. The resulting article, a poignant tale of a man and a bison who had rescued each other, touched a nerve. With the public, donations began to pour into the sanctuary from all over the country. People from all walks of life were moved by the story of the ranger who had found his purpose in the heart of the desert. The sanctuary expanded its mission, creating educational programs for local children, teaching them about wildlife conservation and the importance of compassion. Dr. Thorne developed a new form of animal-assisted therapy using Chief's calming presence to help veterans suffering from PTSD. The results were remarkable. The massive bull who had once been a symbol of untamable fury now became a source of profound healing. His gentle nature and quiet strength, providing a comfort that words could not reach. Veterans who had been closed off and silent for years found themselves opening up in the presence of the bison, sharing stories they had never told anyone. One young veteran, a former Marine who had seen heavy combat in Afghanistan, sat with Chief for hours. One afternoon after the session, he found Jake by the fence line. "I never understood what my therapist meant by finding a safe space," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Until today, being near him, it's like he absorbs all the noise in your head. He doesn't judge you, he just is. It's the first time I felt peace in 10 years. Jake nodded, understanding completely. "He knows what it's like to fight for your life," he said, "and he knows what it's like to win and choose peace afterward." Chief's fame grew, but he remained unchanged by the attention. His days were spent grazing peacefully under the vast Texas sky, his world defined by the fences of the sanctuary and the quiet companionship of the man who had saved him. He had become a legend not for his fury, but for his gentleness, a living paradox that taught everyone who met him that the greatest strength is often found in the quietest souls. Jake Callahan, now in his 60s, had finally found the peace that had eluded him for so long. He was no longer just a Texas Ranger. He was a guardian, a healer, a storyteller. The sanctuary had become his legacy, a testament to a single moment of courage that had rippled outward, changing countless lives. One evening, as he stood with Chief watching the storm roll in over the mountains, he thought about the strange winding path his life had taken. He had spent years running from a ghost only to find his salvation in the heart of a beast. He had faced down monsters of both the human and animal variety, and had learned that they were often one and the same. He had learned that redemption wasn't something you were given, it was something you earned, one compassionate act at a time. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and creosote. Chief let out a low rumble, a sound of contentment that vibrated through the earth. Jake smiled, placing his hand on the bull's massive head. "We did good, partner," he said softly. "We did real good." The old bull nuzzled his hand in response. A silent agreement between two kings of the Texas desert who had fought their battles and found their home not in a kingdom of dust and stone, but in the quiet sanctuary of a shared and mended soul. The story of Ranger Jake and Chief became more than just a local legend. It became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the most unforgiving of landscapes, in the most broken of souls, there is always the possibility of healing, of connection, and of a peace that surpasses all understanding. And sometimes it takes a brush with a monster to rediscover the humanity within yourself and within the wild heart of the world. "I did good, partner," he said softly. "We did real good." The old bull nuzzled his hand in response. A silent agreement between two kings of the Texas desert who had fought their battles and found their home not in a kingdom of dust and stone, but in the quiet sanctuary of a shared and mended soul. The story of Ranger Jake and Chief became more than just a local legend. It became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the most unforgiving of landscapes, in the most broken of souls, there is always the possibility of healing, of connection, and of a peace that surpasses all understanding. And sometimes it takes a brush with a monster to rediscover the humanity within yourself and within the wild heart of the world. 2 years passed, and the sanctuary thrived, evolving from a personal mission into an institution of quiet renown. The seasons turned, the harsh, son of summer giving way to the mild winters of the Big Bend, and with each passing cycle, the roots of the last stand sanctuary. Dug deeper into the community's heart, Jake Callahan, now fully retired from the Texas Rangers, wore his age like a comfortable coat. His movements were slower, his face more deeply lined, but his eyes held a clarity and calm that had been absent. For decades, the ghost on the Rio Grande had not vanished entirely, but it no longer haunted him. It walked beside him, now a quiet companion, a reminder of the fragility of life and the sacred duty to protect it. Chief remained the soul of the sanctuary. His massive form, a constant reassuring presence, he had grown into his role as a healer with a grace that baffled animal behaviorists who came from all over the world to study him. He seemed to possess an innate understanding of suffering, recognizing the invisible wounds carried by the veterans and children who visited. He would stand with immovable patience as a trembling hand reached out to touch his coarse fur or lower his enormous head to meet the gaze of a child too traumatized to speak. His silence was a language of its own, a profound acceptance that communicated more than words ever could. The sanctuary had become a place of pilgrimage for the broken and the lost, but also for the curious. One such visitor was Maya Flores, a young journalist from a major East Coast publication. She arrived in a rental car that was already coated in a fine layer of desert dust, her sharp city clothes, and even sharper skepticism setting her apart from the usual visitors. Her editor had sent her to write a follow-up piece on the cowboy and the bison, a human interest story she privately considered to be sentimental fluff. She was a hard news reporter, trained to uncover hypocrisy, and wrought not to pen fables about magical animals. She watched Jake and Chief's morning routine from a distance, her notepad filled with cynical observations. She saw an old man and a large bovine, their interactions predictable, their bond likely exaggerated by time and retelling. She noted the way Jake spoke to the bull as if it were a person, a detail she planned to frame as charmingly eccentric, if not slightly sad. The veterans she interviewed spoke of Chief with a reverence she found unsettling. They used words like transformative and spiritual, which to her ears sounded like the unprovable claims of the desperate. She was looking for the angle, the hidden truth, the inevitable disillusionment that lay beneath all such perfect narratives. But the land itself was beginning to work on her in ways she didn't understand. The sheer scale of the sky, the profound silence that was not an absence of sound, but a presence of something ancient, and the unrelenting sun that seemed to burn away all pretense. It was a land that demanded honesty, and Maya was finding it increasingly difficult to maintain her professional detachment. This summer was different from the previous ones. The drought had its teeth in the land. The earth was cracked and parched, the creosote bushes brittle and gray. The air was thick with a tension that felt almost electric, awaiting for something to break. Jake felt it every morning when he stepped onto his porch, a low-grade anxiety that hummed just beneath the surface. He and his small team of volunteers had been working tirelessly to maintain water supplies for the animals, cutting back dry brush and establishing fire breaks. But it felt like holding back the tide with a teacup. He would stand with Chief in the evenings, the bull's own restlessness mirroring his own. Chief would sniff the hot, dry wind, his nostrils flaring, his dark eyes scanning the distant horizon, as if he too could sense the coming danger. Maya in her interviews tried to press Jake on the subject. "What's your contingency plan for a wildfire ranger?" she'd asked, her tone professional, but with an edge of challenge. Jake had simply looked at the parched hills around here. He'd said slowly, "You plan for the worst, you pray for the best, and you learn to respect a power that's a whole lot bigger than you are." That answer she had jotted down in her notes as folksy evasion. The break came on a Thursday afternoon. A dry lightning storm rolled through the sky, an angry bruised purple without the mercy of rain. A single bolt forked down miles to the west, striking a dead juniper on a high ridge. At first it was just a whisper of smoke on the horizon, a smudge against the brilliant blue sky. But the wind was relentless, a hot, dry gale blowing from the west, fanning the spark Into a flame, the flame into a wall of fire that began to devour everything in its path, the first official alert came over the emergency radio, a crackle of static and a grim-faced dispatcher, announcing mandatory evacuations for the entire region. Maya was in the small sanctuary office transcribing an interview when Jake burst in. His face was grim, his calm demeanor replaced by the focused intensity of the lawman he had once been. "We have to move now," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "The fire is coming down the valley, and it's moving faster than we can run." Maya's cynicism evaporated in a flash of pure adrenaline. The story had suddenly become terrifyingly real. She was no longer an observer. She was a participant. Her notepad lay forgotten on the desk as she followed Jake outside into a world that had transformed into an apocalyptic nightmare. The sky to the west was no longer blue, but a churning mass of black and orange smoke. The air tasted of ash and the wind carried a low guttural roar, the sound of a billion living things being consumed by flame. Panic was a wild animal threatening to overwhelm her, but Jake's voice cut through the fear. "Maya, I need you at the main gate. Start directing the volunteers. Help them get the smaller animals into the trailers now." His orders were precise, his authority absolute, and she found herself obeying without question. The sanctuary became a scene of organized chaos. Volunteers and staff moved with desperate urgency, herding the smaller animals, the coyotes, the javelinas, the rescued birds in their enclosures, towards the waiting trucks and trailers. The animals were spooked, their instincts screaming at them that a terrible predator was approaching. But Jake's team was well drilled. They worked with a quiet efficiency that held the rising tide of panic at bay. But the larger animals were a different problem. The handful of mustangs and the half-dozen other bison who had joined the sanctuary could not be easily herded or trailered. Their fear was making them unpredictable and dangerous. It was then that Chief stepped forward. Jake had thrown open the gate to his main pasture, and as the other bison began to mill in confusion, their eyes rolling with terror, Chief walked calmly into their midst. He didn't charge or bellow, he simply moved among them. A great dark island of calm in a sea of panic. He nudged a frantic yearling with his massive head, steering her towards the main group. He used his own body to block a young bull who was about to bolt in the wrong direction. It was an act of deliberate, intelligent leadership that left Maya speechless. She watched from the gate, forgetting for a moment the approaching flames, captivated by the sight of the great bull shepherding his herd. His actions seemed to say, "I know this fear, but I will not surrender to it. Follow me." Jake, seeing what was happening, knew he had to trust his partner. "Get the trucks moving." Jake yelled to the volunteers, "Take the main road east, and don't stop." He looked at Maya. "I'm staying with them," he said, pointing to Chief and the small herd of bison. "We'll take the old canyon trail. It's our only chance of finding a safe place." "Are you insane?" Maya shouted back over the roar of the wind and flames. "You'll be trapped." "It's a risk I have to take," Jake replied, his eyes meeting hers, and in them she saw not recklessness, but a profound sense of duty. He wouldn't abandon his herd. He wouldn't abandon Chief. He was making his last stand all over again. Something inside Maya shifted in that moment. All her ambition, her cynicism, her carefully constructed professional walls crumbled to dust. She saw not a subject for a story, but a man of incredible courage preparing to face the inferno alone. She ran to her rental car, grabbed the first aid kit and her satellite phone, and then ran back to Jake's side. "I'm not a ranch hand," she yelled, "but I'm not leaving you here alone." A flicker of surprise crossed Jake's face, followed by a nod of grim acceptance. "Stay close then," he said, "and do exactly as I say." Together they began to move the small herd of bison away from the main road and towards the narrow opening of a rocky canyon. It was a desperate gambit, a flight into the heart of the stone country, hoping to find refuge from the fire that was now consuming the world behind them. The journey into the canyon was a descent into hell. The roar of the fire was a physical presence, a deafening continuous thunder that shook the very ground under their feet. The air was a thick, choking soup of smoke and ash. that burned the lungs and stung the eyes. Embers, the size of fists, rained down from the sky, igniting the dry brush around them in explosions of flame. The world was reduced to a terrifying chaos of heat and noise, and the primal fear of being hunted by an enemy that could not be fought. The bison were on the verge of a full-blown stampede, their powerful bodies trembling, their ancient instincts screaming at them to run blindly from the horror. But Chief was their anchor. He stayed at the front of the small herd, his pace steady and deliberate. When a young cow panicked and tried to bolt, he moved to block her path. His massive form, a living wall of reassurance, his presence was a constant, nonverbal communication to the others, a message of trust in the human who walked beside him. Jake led them onward, his knowledge of the land his only guide. He knew this canyon better than his own home. Every turn, every rock formation, every dry creek bed was etched in his memory. He was searching for a specific place, a wide basin of bare rock and sand, a natural fire break he had discovered years ago. It was their only hope, a sanctuary within a sanctuary. But the fire was a living entity, intelligent and malevolent. It swept down the ridges on either side of the canyon, trying to cut them off. The heat was becoming unbearable. The rocks themselves seemed to glow with an inner heat. Maya stumbled, her lungs screaming for clean air, her body drenched in sweat. She could feel despair beginning to creep, in a cold certainty that they were not going to make it. Just as she was about to fall, Jake's hand gripped her arm, his strength surprising her. "Keep moving," he yelled, his voice raw. "We're almost there." She looked at his face, illuminated by the hellish orange glow. His expression was one of absolute focus, his will a force of nature as powerful as the fire itself, and she found a new reserve of strength she didn't know she possessed. They rounded a final bend, and the canyon opened up into a wide bowl-shaped clearing, at least 200 yards across. The ground was almost entirely slick rock and deep sand, with only a few hardy plants clinging to life in the crevices. It was the place Jake had been searching for. "Here," he shouted. "Get them to the center." Chief seemed to understand instantly. He led the herd into the middle of the rocky basin, where they huddled together, a tight knot of fear and exhaustion. Jake, Maya, and the animals stood together in the eye of the storm. The fire raged on the cliffs above them, a waterfall of liquid flame pouring down into the canyon. A great wall of fire blocked the entrance they had just come through, and another was closing in from the other end. They were completely encircled, trapped in a cauldron of unimaginable heat. The noise was a physical assault, a continuous roar that vibrated through Maya's bones. She crouched on the ground, her head in her hands, certain these were her last moments on Earth. She felt a strange sense of calm descend upon her. The cynical reporter had been burned away, leaving only a young woman facing the end beside a brave old man and a herd of magnificent beasts. It was a better end than she probably deserved. She felt a nudge against her shoulder. She looked up to see Chief standing over her, his great dark eye looking down at her, not with fear, but with a strange and profound tranquility. He seemed to be telling her that it was all right that they were together, and that was what mattered. She reached out and placed her hand on his leg, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. Jake came and crouched beside her. "Just hold on," he said, his voice barely a whisper against the inferno. "It will pass over us. Just hold on." For what felt like an eternity, they endured the firestorm. Was a living, breathing dragon, its hot breath scorching the air, its roar shaking the foundations of the world. They were in the heart of the furnace, a tiny island of life in a sea of absolute destruction. And then, as slowly as it had begun, the roar began to subside. The intensity of the heat lessened. The suffocating smoke began to thin. The fire had consumed all the available fuel and was moving on, leaving a blackened, scarred landscape in its wake. Dawn broke on a scene of utter devastation. The world was painted in shades of black and gray. The skeletal remains of trees pointed like accusing fingers at a sky still hazy with smoke. The ground was hot to the touch, and small fires still flickered in the distance. But in the center of the rocky basin, the small band of survivors was still there. Jake, Maya, and the bison had made it. They were covered in soot, exhausted and dehydrated, but they were alive. A profound silence had fallen over the land, the silence of a world erased and waiting to be reborn. Maya looked around at the scorched earth, her heart filled with a mixture of grief for what was lost and an overwhelming gratitude for what had been saved. She looked at Jake, whose face was a mask of soot and exhaustion, but whose eyes held the weary satisfaction of a battle won, and she looked at Chief, who stood guard over his small herd, a stoic king surveying his ruined but surviving kingdom. Help arrived hours later. The fire crews and volunteers, who had feared the worst, found them huddled in the clearing. The reunion was emotional, a testament to the community Jake had built. Word of their survival spread quickly, becoming an addendum to Keel, the growing legend of the Last Stand Sanctuary. Maya's editor called her on the satellite phone, expecting a story of tragedy. Instead, he got a story of miracles. "I'm not writing about a man and his pet bison," Maya told him, her voice hoarse but strong. "I'm writing about a firestorm. I'm writing about a community that refused to break, and I'm writing about a kind of courage that you don't find in a headline. It has to be lived to be understood." Her story, when it was published, was not the sentimental fluff she had feared. It was a raw, powerful piece of journalism that captured the terror and the beauty of what had happened. It spoke of the bond between a man and an animal, not as a fairy tale, but as a working partnership built on mutual trust and respect. It told of a community that had faced annihilation and come together to rebuild. The response was overwhelming. Donations and volunteers poured in from around the globe. People didn't just want to rebuild the sanctuary, they wanted to be a part of it. In the months that followed, the land began its slow process of healing. The first green shoots pushed their way through the blackened soil, a defiant splash of color in a monochrome world. The rains finally came, washing the ash from the sky and giving the thirsty earth a long overdue drink. One evening, Jake and Chief stood on a high ridge overlooking the valley. The scars of the fire were still visible, a dark tapestry woven across the hills, but here and there new life was returning. The sanctuary below was a hive of activity, new fences being built, new enclosures being designed, stronger and more resilient than before. The fire had taken much, but it had given something back as well. It had burned away complacency and forged the community into something stronger. It had tested every one of them, and they had not been found wanting. Chief nudged Jake's shoulder, his familiar gesture of companionship. Jake leaned his weight against the bull's massive frame, feeling the steady thrum of the great heart within him. The fire had taken his sanctuary, but it hadn't taken his home, because his home was not a place of fences and buildings. It was a state of being, a connection to the land and to the creatures who shared it with him. They had faced the inferno together and survived. They had stood their ground and held on. And in the quiet aftermath, they knew with a certainty that needed no words that whatever came next, they would face it together. The old ranger and the noble beast, two survivors on a scarred but healing land, forever bound by the fires of adversity and the enduring power of a friendship that had become a legend. The fire had taken his sanctuary, but it hadn't taken his home, because his home was not a place of fences and buildings. It was a state of being, a connection to the land and to the creatures who shared it. With him they had faced the inferno together and survived. They had stood their ground and held on, and in the quiet aftermath, they knew with a certainty that needed no words that whatever came next, they would face it together. The old ranger and the noble beast, two survivors on a scarred but healing land, forever bound by the fires of adversity and the enduring power of a friendship that had become a legend. In the 2 years that followed the fire, the Last Stand Sanctuary was reborn, not just rebuilt, but reimagined. The scorched earth bloomed with a ferocity that only post-fire landscapes possess, a vibrant testament to life's stubborn refusal to be extinguished. Donations and legions of volunteers had transformed the sanctuary into a state-of-the-art facility, but one that wore its modernity with quiet grace. The new barns were built from reclaimed wood and local stone. The fences were stronger, but designed to blend into the landscape, and the heart of it all, the ethos of quiet healing, remained untouched. It was A golden age for the sanctuary, a time of peaceful growth and profound impact the Veterans Program had gained. National accreditation with Dr. Thorne and a team of dedicated therapists working alongside Jake to refine their unique brand of nature-based therapy. Maya Flores, the once cynical journalist, now served on the sanctuary's board of directors, her powerful articles having become the sanctuary's most effective voice. She visited often, her city's softness softened by the desert sun, her friendship with Jake a source of mutual respect and gentle humor. But amidst this idyllic prosperity, a subtle shadow began to lengthen, a truth as old and inexorable as the mountains themselves. Chief was getting old. It wasn't something the casual observer would notice to the visitors and volunteers. He was still the same magnificent monarch, the 2,000-pound legend, who anchored the sanctuary with his serene presence. But Jake saw it. He saw it in the way Chief was a little slower to rise from his bed of soft grass in the cool mornings. He saw it in the slight tremor of a hind leg after a long walk along the perimeter fence, and he felt it in the quiet moments when he would lean against the bull's massive side. The steady drumbeat of that great heart was just a fraction slower, a little more measured. It was a secret language between two old friends, a shared acknowledgement of time's relentless passage. Each new sign sent a pang of grief through Jake's heart, a premonition of a silence he could not bear to imagine. He found himself watching Chief with a new intensity, trying to memorize every detail. The way the sunlight caught the silvering hairs on his muzzle, the deep wisdom in his dark eyes, the soft rumble in his chest that signaled contentment. It was a quiet, desperate attempt to hold on to something he knew he could not keep forever. During this time, Chief's role as patriarch of the herd solidified into something truly remarkable. He was the calm center of their universe, a living law that all the other animals seemed to understand and respect. When two young bulls would lock horns in a contest of youthful pride, Chief would approach not with a challenge but with an immense and weary stillness that seemed to suck the aggression right out of the air. He would simply stand and watch, and the young bulls would disengage as if ashamed to display such foolishness in the presence of true authority. He was a king who ruled not by force, but by the sheer weight of his presence. And his past, he had faced death and chosen peace, and that choice radiated from him, a lesson that every creature in the sanctuary seemed to absorb. One afternoon a call came from Dr. Thorne. Her voice was urgent and strained. "Jake, we have a situation. A canned hunting operation was just raided up near the Panhandle. They've confiscated dozens of animals, but there's one, a young bison bull. He's a mess." Jake felt a familiar weariness settle over him. "We're at capacity, Aris. You know that I know, but this one is different. He's massive, full of fire, but he's been so brutalized. He's a danger to himself and everyone else. They're going to euthanize him tomorrow if we don't take him. They say he's untamable." The word untamable hung in the air, a direct echo of Chief's own history. How could he refuse? Jake knew the balance of the sanctuary was delicate. The peaceful herd he had so carefully cultivated could be thrown into chaos by a new aggressive male. And Chief in his advancing age did not need that kind of stress. But then he looked out his window and saw Chief standing on a low hill watching the sunset, his silhouette a symbol of every second chance. Jake believed in. "All right, Aris," he said, sighing. "Bring him home." The arrival of the new bull was like the arrival of a thunderstorm. He exploded out of the transport trailer, a whirlwind of fury and fear. He was younger than Chief, but almost as large, his body a knot of raw power, his hide crisscrossed with fresh scars and the brands of his former captors. His eyes were wild with a purely psychotic terror. He charged the reinforced fence with such force that the steel posts groaned in protest. He paced the quarantine pen like a caged demon, his bellows of rage echoing across the peaceful valley. The other animals retreated, their own tranquility shattered by this intrusion of pure chaos. They named him Coda, a Sioux word for friend, a choice that felt like a prayer, a hope whispered against a hurricane. For the first week, Jake tried to work with Coda alone, using the same techniques of quiet patience that had reached Chief, years ago, but it was no use. Kota saw his stillness as a threat, his gentle voice as a prelude to violence. The young bull was a raw nerve of trauma, so deeply wounded that he had concluded that the only defense was a relentless preemptive offense. The first meeting between the two bulls was an event the entire sanctuary watched with bated breath. Jake opened the gate between the quarantine pen and Chief's main pasture. Kota stormed through, immediately spotting the old monarch grazing peacefully under a cottonwood tree. With a roar of challenge, Kota charged, his head lowered, his powerful legs churning up the dust. The veterans watching from the observation deck tensed, expecting a battle of titans, a violent clash for dominance. But Chief did not meet the charge. He simply lifted his massive head and stood his ground, his body as immovable as the mountains behind him. He did not bellow back. He did not lower his own horns. He absorbed the full force of Kota's rage with nothing but his immense dignity. Kota skidded to a halt just feet from the old bull. Confused by the lack of response, he snorted and pawed the ground, a display of frustrated aggression. But Chief simply watched him, his ancient eyes holding no fear, no anger, only a deep, profound sadness. It was as if he was looking at a painful reflection of his own past. And Kota, a chivi beast who had only ever known violence, did not know how to react to this quiet, powerful sorrow. He backed away, his challenge unmet, his fury deflated by a force he couldn't comprehend. This was the beginning of the unspoken tutelage Jake realized with a dawning sense of awe that he could not teach this broken soul his own journey with. Chief had been a partnership between two wounded equals, but this was different. Kota did not need a human friend, he needed a bison father, he needed a king to show him how to be something other than a monster. The lessons were subtle, unfolding over the course of the long summer weeks. One sweltering afternoon, Kota tried to assert his dominance at the main water trough, shouldering the other bison aside. With brute force, Chief, who had been resting in the shade, rose slowly and walked to the trough. He did not challenge Kota for a drink. Instead, he simply stood nearby and waited his patience. A silent rebuke. Kota drank his fill, but the water seemed to offer no satisfaction. He was aware of the old bull's silent judgment of the other animals watching him. His aggression had won him the water, but it had cost him something far more valuable: respect. Eventually he moved away, and Chief and the rest of the herd drank together in peace. The lesson was clear: power seized is not the same as power earned. Maya was there to witness it, her journalist's eye capturing the nuance of the interaction. "That's not animal behavior," she murmured to Jake. "That's philosophy. What he's teaching him isn't how to be a bison. He's teaching him how to be a king." Jake nodded, his gaze fixed on his old friend, his heart swelling with a bittersweet pride. "He's teaching him how to be Chief." Another lesson came during a sudden violent thunderstorm, a common occurrence in the high desert. The sky split open with a crash of thunder that sent the herd into a state of panic. Kota, his own trauma triggered by the explosive sounds, began to run wildly, his fear a contagious poison that threatened to incite a full stampede. Just as chaos was about to take hold, Chief moved with a purpose that defied his age. He didn't run. He walked deliberately to the front of the herd, placing himself between them and the direction of their blind flight. He let out a single low bellow, not of fear, but of command, a sound that cut through the noise of the storm. It was a sound that said, "I am here, be still." The herd calmed, their panic subsiding in the face of his unshakable presence. He then led them slowly and calmly to the shelter of a wide rocky overhang, where they waited out the storm in safety. Jake and Maya watched from the porch, soaked to the skin. "He's not just their leader," Jake said, his voice filled with reverence. "He's their sanctuary." Chief's most profound lesson, however, was reserved for one of the veterans, a young man named Ben, who was so haunted by his past that he rarely spoke. He would often stand at the fence of the main pasture, just watching for hours. One day, Ben suffered a severe PTSD episode, sinking to the ground in the grips of a waking nightmare. Kota, sensing the chaotic energy of the man's distress, became highly agitated. He began to pace the fence line, snorting and tossing his head, mirroring the man's inner turmoil. Just as Koda's agitation was about to escalate into a full-blown charge. Chief intervened. He moved his massive body, deliberately positioning himself directly between Koda and the fence where Ben sat. He stood there like a great wall, a living shield. He did not look at Koda or at Ben. He simply faced forward, absorbing and neutralizing the waves of fear and anger that were radiating from both the man and the young bull. After several long minutes, both Ben and Koda began to calm their breathing, syncing with the slow, steady rhythm of the old bull who stood guard over them both that day. Koda learned the most important lesson of all, that true strength isn't used to intimidate or to dominate. It is used to protect the vulnerable, to shield the broken from the storms of the world. Jake felt tears welling in his eyes as he witnessed the scene. He looked at Maya and saw that her own face was wet with tears. He's passing it on. Jake whispered, he knows his time is getting shorter, and he's making sure the sanctuary will be safe. He's making sure his family will have a king when he's gone. The unspoken tutelage continued for the rest of the year, a slow and steady transfer of wisdom and responsibility. Koda's wild fury was gradually tempered into a focused strength, his fear replaced by a watchful confidence. He still possessed a fire that Chief no longer had, but it was now a controlled burn, a fire that could warm and protect rather than destroy. The final test, the true passing of the mantle, came one crisp autumn evening. A lone mountain lion, emboldened by the gathering dusk, had crept down from the high cliffs, its sights set on a newborn calf that had strayed from its mother. The cougar was sleek and silent, a ghost in the twilight. Koda saw it first, his muscles tensed, and he let out a sharp warning snort. His first instinct, the instinct of his violent past, was to charge recklessly, a solo act of heroic fury. But he hesitated for a fraction of a second. His head turned to the old monarch resting under his favorite oak tree. Chief was already on his feet. He didn't charge. He let out a rumbling bellow that was not a challenge but a deep, resonant call to arms, a summons. He then began to move, not towards the lion, but parallel to it, taking a strategic position that would cut off the predator's line of retreat. Koda understood in a flash of brilliant insight. He mirrored the maneuver on the opposite side. The two massive bulls, a king and his prince, moved in perfect concert, a coordinated pincer movement that was a display of breathtaking intelligence and teamwork. The mountain lion, a master predator in its own right, found itself caught between two unmovable mountains of muscle and will. It had come for an easy meal and had instead found a unified kingdom. It let out a frustrated snarl and melted back into the shadows from which it had come. Koda and Chief stood together for a long moment, watching until the threat was completely gone. Then the young bull turned to the old one and lowered his head in a gesture of unmistakable respect and allegiance. The crown had been passed. The lesson was complete. A few weeks later, Jake was making his evening rounds. He found the herd grazing peacefully in the main pasture. Koda stood at the edge of the group, watchful and alert, his presence exuding a calm authority that was a mirror of his mentor. Chief was not with them. Jake felt a familiar stab of fear and scanned the horizon. He found him under the old oak tree on the hill where he had so often watched the sunset. Jake walked slowly up the hill, his boots making soft sounds in the grass. Chief was lying down. His breathing was shallow but peaceful. His eyes were closed. Jake knelt beside him and laid a hand on his thick fur. The old bull's eye opened, and he looked at Jake, a look of deep affection and final farewell. He let out one last soft sigh, and then his great heart was still. Jake did not move. He sat there beside his friend, his hand resting on the still warm hide as the stars began to appear in the vast Texas sky. He did not weep. He felt a profound and aching sadness, but it was outweighed by an even more profound sense of gratitude and peace. He had been given the gift of a friendship that had saved his soul. He had been allowed to walk beside true greatness. His partner was gone, but his legacy was all around him. It was in the thriving sanctuary, in the healing veterans, in the community that had come together, and it was in the young king, who now stood watch over the herd under the endless stars. The Last Stand sanctuary had a new chief, and Jake Callahan, a man who had once been haunted by a ghost, now knew that true love never dies. It simply changes form. It becomes a story, a legacy, a light that continues to shine long after the sun has set. Jake remained with Chief until the desert dawn painted the mountains in soft pastels. He rose, not with the weight of loss, but with the lightness of peace. Below, he saw Coda standing sentinel over the herd, the mantle of the old king worn with a quiet grace. The Last Stand Sanctuary was more than just a place. It was a promise kept, a cycle of healing set in motion. Jake Callahan smiled, his long shadow merging with the morning light. The legend was now a legacy, a story of redemption passed on, as enduring and peaceful as the ancient land itself. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.